Right, so this presentation is going to be a guide for how to complete the investigation techniques that you're going to use in the analysis stage of your projects. Remember, the analysis techniques are really important for showing that journey to reaching your client requirements for your project, which you should have at the end of the analysis stage, which very specifically describe what your system is going to do and what it's going to include. Okay, so these are your options. Now, the first two, interviews and user questionnaires, I would expect that you must do one or the other or both. Okay, not all projects would have a sufficient number of users to merit maybe using a questionnaire. Not all projects have been made for an individual client, and therefore you might say an interview is therefore not a suitable technique. It's not mandatory to do both. If you are in a situation where you have got a client and you have got a large number of users, it's up to you to determine whether you think it's a valuable technique to use in that situation. I would think if you have got an individual client, an interview certainly is a priority over an individual sort of a questionnaire sent out to users, but it's your decision. Okay. Other techniques we're going to talk about, we've got observation of the system. So some understanding about what that involves and how you document it. You might need to analyse some of the existing paper-based documents in the current system. That could be particularly important for database type projects where you're digitalising a inefficient paper-based system of some description. So we'll talk about that. It might be that you're making an improved version of an existing computer system. So clearly, you know, we'd need to sort of focus in and do some investigation of that existing computer system and look at how it works and what the issues are with it, and what the features are that we could then incorporate into an improved version of it. So that could potentially be a tool to use. For some of you, this is going to be quite an important one. So showing that you've looked at similar systems that already exist to the one, you know, similar to in terms of to the type of system that you might develop, and obviously using that to sort of gain inspiration and ideas from can be a really useful tool. And then the final one is the use of prototyping as well. Okay. You don't have to use all of these techniques. Let's just make that clear. You do need to use ones which are the most suitable for your project from your point of view, and which ones are going to be most useful in terms of helping you identify, you know, the specific requirements for your project. Okay, and you do want to kind of, you know, as you complete your analysis, you know, these techniques, one thing should kind of lead to another. There should be, you could almost sort of tell a story to then how you ultimately end up with those client requirements at the end of analysis. Okay, so it might be that information from the interview yields, you know, examples of similar systems, for example, which you then go on to investigate, which then feeds into the prototype that you have, and so on. So you want to sort of make sure there's that kind of narrative. You can see how that dialogue has unfolded during the course of your investigation to lead to the requirements at the end of it. Okay, so I'm not going to set any kind of figures on, you know, you need to do all of them or 3 of them or so on. It's got to be suitable for your project. You know, it could be that you might just do an interview and a really thorough document analysis and description investigation of the current system. You know, it depends on the project. Okay, it's certainly something that you can speak to me about and discuss with me if you're unsure. In terms of the interviews and the questionnaires, then, so the really important thing here is it's not just a case of doing the interview and that's done. You really do need to think very carefully about every single question that goes into that interview, and why is it you thought that is a good question to ask, and how is it going to help you actually identify requirements for your project. Okay, and I think you previously heard me sort of talk about this, you know, and this applies to the questionnaire as well. You know, exactly the same with the questionnaire. You need to think about the questions that you're creating and the options that you're providing in terms of response, and making sure that the information you're obtaining is going to be useful to you. You know, this question here, which could be a questionnaire question, do you like games? Well, you got 95% of people responded yes. Well, great. Well, how's that useful to this project? You know, you're not going to actually be able to say how that has helped inform your actual requirements. Okay, so you know, trying to you know, in the interview, thinking of sort of, you know, open questions that are specific to, you know, to the system. Obviously, in an interview, you've got the ability to be able to think on your feet a little bit more and ask questions and follow-up questions and so on. You know, all the time in your mind, you need to be thinking about how, you know, trying to get that clear picture in your mind as to what the requirements are going to be. Okay, so in terms of the interview, the starting point for this is generating questions, and you can pause the video at any point, but this is just a kind of rough guide of some generic questions which you could potentially be useful to your project, and you could certainly take some of these and put your own spin on them and sort of make them more specific to your project before you conducted your interview. There might well be questions that you think of that aren't on this list that would be relevant to ask. Okay, so you can ask any question, but just have that thing in the back of your mind all the time: is why am I asking this question? How's it going to help me? Okay, so do that in advance. Think of the questions in advance, a bit like we did with the tic-tac-toe. Okay, and I'd generate as many questions as you can, and then you could maybe go through a process of filtering them down a bit. Okay, remember the whole point of the interview, to show that the interview has been used effectively as a technique, is that you are giving chance for your client to give detailed answers and not just single word or single sentences. You know, that would be indicative of a poorly conducted interview if we were only getting kind of 1 or 2 word responses or a single sentence response, for example. So you're looking for detail. You're looking for those sort of follow-on questions as well to clarify points and understanding. At the end of the interview, sign and date the document. Okay, and write up the results of the interview. So you can see here the image that we have on screen now is an example of and this was only half of the interview, by the way, that was typed up, but we can see you know, a lot of detail in the responses from the client here. And then, you know, at the end of this interview, you could then analyze and pick out what the most useful aspects are, what you've learned from each of these questions that's informing your client requirements. Okay, so type it up and document it with the analysis section, lots of detail as possible. You may even want to record like an audio version of the interview as well, so that you've then got an exact transcript of what was said, and that could make this process easier as well, so you don't need any detail. Any note taking that you do, bear in mind that can go, so those draft interview notes that you take at the time, if you do take that approach, can be digitalized, scanned in, and also then added to the appendix, where we can sort of use that as as evidence of the interview being conducted. Okay, and you'd have your typed up version here in the main body of your report. Okay, so the questionnaire again, as I'm going to keep saying, think very carefully about the questions you include there. You would probably suggest that most of the questions in a questionnaire need to be closed, because you can then obviously compare answers and calculate statistics and percentages of respondents and so on. But think carefully about what responses you offer there, what the answers are, and also think very carefully about where you include open questions in the questionnaire as well. And I would definitely recommend that you do include, quite a few open questions to gain some understanding about why respondents have selected certain answers, and that could be very helpful again for evidencing that dialogue and understanding requirements. Okay, so do think about open questions that could be relevant too. Okay, once you've actually collected in the questionnaire, of course, you need to analyze the results, and for this I'd recommend different tools. So I would certainly create the questionnaire using something like Google Docs or Microsoft Forms, because these graphs that you can see on this slide can then automatically be generated for you. You're not going to need to spend time sort of creating Excel spreadsheets and counting up results and that kind of thing. So that's a nice tip to save some time. But as always, once you've got your results, it's the conclusion that really matters, and I think I'm going to keep highlighting this again and again and again here. How has that particular question and the response to that question, what have you learned from that, and how is it informing requirements for your particular project? Okay, I'm going to sound like a broken record on that by the time I finish this presentation, but it's really important. You can see that in this example, every question has a summary after it, and some analysis from the student saying how those responses are helping identify objectives. Really, really key. Observation could be another potential tool that you use. This is particularly useful if you have a current system in place that you need to understand. So you literally do what it says on the tin, really. You go along and you actually watch the system in action. You watch the people enacting that system. You record exactly what they do, how long it takes to do things, what equipment they're using, anything really, but it's about the process and understanding the process of how something works. That's really important here in terms of understanding. So say for example you've got an ordering system that you want to create. Well, you might need to observe the current ordering process to understand all the different stages involved in that, which your system may or may not need to kind of have some interaction with at some point. In terms of documenting it, you can see a nice example on the right here, which you can use as an example. And we have here basically the time of events, a description of what is actually happening, and then I quite like this feature that this candidate has done. They're kind of saying again this thing about linking it back to their requirements, exactly what they've seen, and then how they feel that that might influence the requirements for their system. Okay, and again, I think this one actually went on. That's only half of the observation that was done here. Okay, so yeah, just say what you see and describe it in detail, and also a useful opportunity observation to identify problems as well in the current system that is being used, and again helps provide more justification for a new one. Document analysis is literally where you collect the documents that your client already uses and you analyze those documents. Okay, so collect any documents that you feel are potentially relevant that are currently being used, and try and get copies of them. And ideally, if they've got the data sort of written or typed into them already, that would be good. You might need to use some fictitious data there if there's anything sensitive, so just bear that in mind as well. And personal data, just be careful there. Use fictitious data instead. And you've got an idea here about some of the things that you can be analysing in relation to this. So this is just one example of a completed timesheet in this particular project, and the old system, of course, relying on a sort of manual timesheet that was filled in and completed using pen and paper. And then we have the use of a analysis sheet here to begin to document some of the data within the actual document, and obviously that then potentially can be useful to you later on in terms of designing the database tables and structures that you might need. Okay, it can also be useful for identifying further problems as well, potentially. So yeah, document analysis probably suitable for database type projects, and data dictionaries is going to probably be one of the key things that you generate based on that analysis. Right, so analysis of existing systems, related systems, and market research, well, these all follow a similar theme really, in terms of you basically analysing those, whatever that particular system is, and looking at how it currently works. So, in this particular example, on the right hand side, we have a project which involved this particular game that the student was going to make a computerized version of, and here we have then from that understanding of the logic and the moves that can be made in this game, which are obviously going to need to be simulated by the program. So that was quite a nice kind of walkthrough of an actual game, how it works specifically, and then pulling from it the analysis, pulling from it the actual requirements in terms of the moves and the functionality needed in the game. If I take off the animation, I think the one underneath here was a current system that's been used in physics to teach a particular topic. And they've actually just shown screenshots of how the teacher currently taught that topic and identified again features and also issues with that method of teaching that hopefully could then be improved upon in the student's project. Okay, and then this one as well is one that you've maybe already seen before, but this was existing research and looking at sort of applications that already exist in the kind of area that you're looking to create your project in, and just taking inspiration from them, okay, and ideas from them to inform the requirements of the game. Okay, so lots of screenshots and explanation and draw those conclusions as to why they're relevant. Technical research is particularly important for the physics projects and the simulation projects, and really important for analysing and showing the mathematics that are going to be involved in the actual simulation that are going to need to be obviously programmed as well. And the final one is prototyping.